Welcome to the Healing My Parts podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and raising awareness about dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID. We are your hosts, the system behind Healing My Parts, which also includes parts that function as a therapist and leader in a mental health niche space. We'll be sharing tips and tools that have helped us and many others, while also sharing insights from our own journey of living with the condition. We'll also be hosting guests for conversations to help educate, dispel myths, and most especially help those living with dissociative identities and professionals who treat the condition. Thank you so much for tuning in. And now, let's get healing. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you to the show today, and I'm especially excited about our guest, Ryder Fox from Thrive Lifeline and Stronger You Wellness. And I don't want to take away any of the amazing thunder of this human that I get to sit with today. So, Ryder, welcome to the show. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what you'd like folks to know about you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Monica. And it's a pleasure to share this space with all of y'all. I am a person who has a variety of different multiply marginalized identities and backgrounds and come from a very non-traditional space. So was raised in a religious cult as a person who is queer and trans and was dissociative and recognized my plurality as a child very early and in a space that was really abusive and difficult to grow up in and chronically ill from a young age and those kinds of things. So many different experiences that wrapped into space that were just compounded by the trauma that I faced in my upbringing and then was disowned as a teenager, houseless, and I never went to school as a child because school was evil. And so the isolation that we experienced was very severe, and we weren't allowed to interact with anybody that was outside of my family's belief system. And so navigating the world as a teen who was recently kicked out was a lot and just meant a lot of doing everything possible to survive. And so that setting really the sense of how to survive and carve out your own pathway has just been a huge part of my own story. And I've navigated my own suicidality, my own grief and losses in my own life, and then with community throughout my young adult and adult life. And so that really threads so deeply into my own narrative and then into my community experiences and chosen family experiences that it shapes a whole lot of how we show up in the world. And I think I was 27 when I started Stronger You. So Stronger You was founded as a client-based business back in 2007. And that just created a space where we could build community and give back to folks that also navigate chronic conditions, are struggling, are multiply marginalized, are not getting the care that they need in more mainstream avenues and that kind of thing. And so from that space on, that became my professional endeavor. My early career prior to that began when I was still a teenager, and all of that work was also done inside of vulnerable communities and really extreme crisis moments and those kinds of things. And so just pulling all of those things together has allowed for my life to have a trajectory of community care and really understanding not just vulnerable experiences, but the things that folks really often don't feel comfortable sitting with, and the extremes of life, or the folks that are on the margins in life, not just because they are marginalized, but because their experiences continue to push them into the margins, and the ostracization that they experience and that kind of thing continues to compound their experiences. So all of the work that we do at this point has centered around really trying to improve those systems of care and create spaces that folks can be welcomed into instead of ostracized out of.
Your story is honestly so compelling. And the thing that I kept coming back to while I was listening was your resilience. You've been through so much and somehow have managed to translate that into what looks to be a life of service throughout your own healing process. You're moving forward without leaving anyone behind. That's a huge testament to who you all are. There's a lot of people who can't do that. It's a gift, I think, probably both to yourselves and to the world. I can tell that a lot of it came from your own experience, and I'm guessing what you saw in your life and as you were seeking your own healing. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the need that you saw that sparked Thrive in particular, and especially for folks who have marginalized intersecting identities. And I want to pause to also acknowledge that many of those marginalized identities for folks can also be invisible.
Yeah, absolutely. I was 40 years old by the time I started Thrive. So there's a lot in that journey, but in my own ferocity for this doesn't have to be this way, we can do better. And there's no reason why people are still facing the same things that I was facing as a teenager 30 years later. This is ridiculous. Why are we still in this space? And I've done all of the work prior to that point around advocacy, around client development, around service development, and so on. And so had all of that history behind, and then started leading crisis teams in 2016 as a means of kind of taking this back, because we are too often seeing our communities not get the support that they need in the times that they need it, and being dismissed, harmed further, facing more trauma and having to recover from that and so on. And so by the time Thrive became an official organization that was born out of the pandemic, and my already existing team was underneath another organization, and we did crisis support for our members within that space, and then had this existing support structure. But the need was so big so fast. We already knew that we would be supporting our members as the pandemic began, and that just became bigger and bigger. And so we recognized that, as we were saying, this is a need that exists and needs support that is sustained. It's not a 2-week lockdown kind of situation. We need this. And it's not just this membership that needs it. It is folks in all of our communities that need this support. And at the time of separating and creating Thrive as a separate organization, we recognized that there are existing lines for queer folks. There are existing lines for folks that have specific identities or specific experiences, whether it's domestic violence, being a vet, navigating sexual assault, and those kinds of things. There are these singular identity and singular experience spaces, but there's nothing that exists from the intersections of marginalization. And so frequently what we are finding when we are working with folks is that nobody understands their intersectionality, and nobody can hold space for their multiple truths and the tension and the impossibilities of resource gaps and those kinds of things. And so really understanding that there is such a gap in that kind of resource for multiple marginalization, and that all of our communities that are facing the most chronic conditions, the most, extreme marginalization, who are regularly in crisis. Their life is crisis because they're just ongoing, facing barrier upon barrier upon barrier, and that just continues to compound. And so every story that we hear is not just their XYZ identity, it is the compounding of their intersecting identities and how their daily marginalization experiences continue to compound their trauma, and that just continues to cycle. And so if you think about this as chronic and you think about it as intersectional, then how can we stand in the gaps and create a resource that will improve that? And so just, I think, in all getting fed up with things that aren't supportive, and folks not seeking to understand greater need, and really holding all of these multiple truths, became a crux of our work.
I feel like so many people who are working in the field can learn so much from your knowledge base. That you had mentioned earlier on about how accessing crisis care can be so traumatizing, which is so true, and it has been for decades now. And more so for people who live with intersecting marginalized identities, because the system itself doesn't think about intersectionality, right? The system thinks about what it sees as the issue at hand, which might be quote unquote safety. How do we contain this person in this moment without thinking about the layers and nuances that exist within that human being that they're trying to take care of? And I think for folks who are systems, there's also that additional layer of complexity because so many people don't understand plurality. How or why do you think that systems struggle in particular to access safe and affirming care within the traditional frameworks?
Yeah, again, like you've touched on it, just lack of education, lack of understanding is at the crux of it. And that continues to compound if folks are educated in a mainstream system that continues to tell them that DID is too rare or that it doesn't exist or that people are faking it or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if all of our mainstream media are also perpetuating the stigma of how dangerous somebody is and that they can't control their lives, they are going to harm themselves and other people, that everybody is going to be harmed, then not only are the practitioners themselves or the providers, whether it's a crisis line responder, whether it's a peer supporter, or whether it is someone with a PhD that's sitting one-on-one with somebody, it's no matter what, if that education isn't there and the practitioner themselves is afraid of the person that they're supporting, then all of the emphasis becomes on the responder's experience or on the practitioner's experience, not on the persons who are in need. So for a plural system that is reaching out, they're going to often not be believed. They're going to have to educate. They're going to have to prove themselves. They're going to have to articulate well enough to be perceived and to be honored and to educate and to role reverse and take care of the practitioner instead of be the one taken care of. They're going to have to also face consequences for anything that they say that could exacerbate the already fear that the responder or the practitioner is navigating. And that layer upon layer just creates such a greater extreme of crisis experience, of acuteness for the system. And so many systems are so practiced that they are now going to reach out saying, I know that I need help at this point, or we need somebody to listen because it has gotten to this point. But in order to do that, we're going to have to say this, we're going to have to make it this way. It's going to have to, all of these kind of I's are going to have to be dotted, T's crossed before we can even do that. And then we're going to have to take care of the practitioner on the other side. And so that doesn't actually help them to get any more than, just another person on the other side of a conversation, but it's one where they're in the support role rather than being supported. And so, and that is if things are good. If a conversation is healthy and if they're able to articulate, then that is something where you can find a body on the other side and maybe co-regulate and come back into a space of centering. But if you are facing, if none of that goes correctly, then they're going to face being escalated to authorities. They're going to face forced hospitalization. They're going to, there are so many things that come that fight greater consequences, greater trauma that just further compound the crisis that they're experiencing rather than help them to be seen, heard, and held within care that helps them to then come back and care for each other and take care of themselves and move on.
I was just thinking of as you're talking about the experience of someone who's plural being in crisis and anybody being in crisis having to access your frontal cortex to explain what's happening for you and what you need and educating. It's not even a realistic ask for someone in crisis. And then you add the layers of what somebody's internal landscape might look like and all of the varying different parts having their own different crises that looks different from, it's hard to put this into word for people who aren't plural to know what that internal experience can be like. The person fronting can have a very different crisis experience than multiple parts behind that might be passive but still active. I have heard many first responders and many folks working in emergency rooms having a background of also working in hospitals and also having been hospitalized plenty in my history who will say, well, the only thing that matters is their physical safety. So, we have to hospitalize them. We have to hospitalize them. And I don't think that they understand the damage that that really does. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how forced hospitalization does in fact traumatize and damage people in a long-lasting way that really isn't, I'm going to call it excusable, to quote unquote save a life, that it's an excuse we can do better. But I think partly people aren't doing better because they don't really understand the extent of the harm.
Yeah, absolutely. Not every system is a complex trauma survivor, but it's extremely common. And so if we operate first from the complex trauma survival, then already having your body restrained, a body that often doesn't feel like yours and doesn't feel safe, and now it's going to be restrained by others, and they've often already faced being physically restrained and physically abused and some sort of physical unsafety. And now somebody else takes away your bodily autonomy. And that's just a body, but you already, as a system, don't feel comfortable with this body, have already not had enough agency over yourselves and what you want for that body. And then on top of that, you are having to navigate, maybe your system can't even communicate because it's not safe to, if you have many inside who are saying this, and then someone else is saying that, and then someone else is saying, like you were just saying, many people are saying many different things. Or even if there is one person in the system that is fronting, and so maybe there's a more coherent narrative, there's still a lot of internal chaos that's going. So it doesn't matter if externally somebody appears to be in a coherent narrative, which is what comportment is required in crisis moments. And so if we take aside the physical experience alone is already completely unsafe, and then the mental experience of the labor that has to go into what narrative are we sharing, and can we get our shit together enough, excuse me, can we get this together enough to be able to say, this is what's happening, this is the help that we need, and also continue to have that agency and articulation to get the support that you need? And is that support even available? And if you're also dissociating, and there are littles and trauma holders and everybody who cannot articulate in a academic manner, then there's that much more heaping of danger. There's more folks that are going to dismiss, more folks that are going to belittle, who are going to patronize, who are going to try to stop somebody from existing. And we've had folks be told to behave in a certain way. If you just keep acting like a little, if you keep acting like a child, I'm not going to help you. There's more forced contracts, there's more forced, et cetera. So these things just go on and on and on. And so the mental labor, the emotional crisis that continues, the inability to navigate agency for your mind, for your body, for yourselves and your different needs internally, there's no space to reduce the chaos internally, because everybody is facing crisis, and all can't even come together to say, what do we need? Because we can't be heard internally, we're definitely not being heard externally. And all of that just continues to compound that trauma, and that trauma just cycles into more crisis, that crisis cycles into more trauma, and so on, and that loop just continues forever.
Is one of those moments that I feel slightly speechless. I'm thinking back in history and thinking, when I think back to the 90s and I think back to some of the things that happen today in traditional care, it's not a lot different, which is exactly what you were saying. It also occurs to me while we're talking that there are people listening who may have never heard the terms carceral and non-carceral care. So would you mind defining that a little bit for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. At face value, carceral means the legal system is involved and there is some sort of legal restraint. Typically, we think about the prison industry, but when we're thinking about mental health, then we have to think about all of the different ways that somebody may be restrained, whether it's physical and in a non-consensual forced hospitalization or a non-consensual rescue. So like you said, the goal is only to keep the body safe and not anything else. So if we can keep someone breathing, then the carceral idea is keep them breathing and we have succeeded, but it doesn't take into account the humanity there. And so there are many forms of non-consent that happen, whether it's a coercive measure or a contractual measure, or even if somebody quote unquote voluntarily receives intervention of some kind, it's typically coerced in a way that says, if you don't X, then we will not Y. And so people are withheld access to care. And so in the mental health, and we can say this in medical care as well, but we go a little bit broader in non-carceral definition to think about anything that removes consent, removes agency, and removes the self-expertise of the folks that are being supported. And so the non-carceral approach then is the opposite of that. How can we seek consent? How can we uplift the self-expertise of those who we're supporting rather than the expertise of the supporter, the practitioner that's there? And how can we make sure that everything that is done in safety planning and intervention, or just in co-regulation, because maybe that person doesn't want any kind of safety planning or need any safety planning or doesn't need intervention. It's understanding what is relevant and meaningful to the people who are being supported, and how can we come alongside them and underneath to elevate and just facilitate what feels safe, supportive, or helpful to them.
To help people get a sort of vivid picture of what it might look like. Would you be able to maybe walk somebody through the differences or what it would look like if a plural person were to pick up the phone or text Thrive Lifeline? How is it a different experience from maybe calling a conventional hotline that has a much more carceral approach?
First and foremost, we extensively train our responders. Every single responder has hundreds of hours devoted into hands-on mentorship and education. And that's a minimum of a year-long educational program that we work with them. And so first and foremost, they are exceptionally well trained. And I can't even say that we are trained enough within a year, but compared to what folks are getting in other lifelines or even in academic settings around multiple marginalization, around plurality and the experiences of dissociation, all of the different ways that may arise, it is extreme. We're very extensively training folks. And so when somebody reaches out, there's relationship first. How do we get to know who these folks are, and whether that's a plural system? We may know somebody is plural because they tell us, right? Some people may be able to say, some people may not be able to, or they may not feel safe telling us that they are plural. So no matter what, it's relationship first. Secondly, it's what other things are happening underneath. So folks learn to code things. Folks learn to communicate in soft ways so that they're kind of giving us a little bit and seeing what we will capture in that. And so in that relationship building, do we learn the signs of dissociation or learn the signs that there are others that are involved in this conversation? Because they, again, not everyone's going to feel safe telling us there are 5 of us that are talking to you right now, and we will use different names, and so is speaking now, and so is speaking now. And sometimes that will happen. And we love that there's the safety of like forming a multiple relationship with folks, but that's not always how somebody will feel safe communicating or can communicate, right? Is somebody dissociating? Are they losing language? Are they able to communicate in full words or not? You know what? Dissociation looks so different for every single system. And how do we honor that? And at the crux of it, someone's going to reach out and find a human on the other side who wants to know them as they are in that moment, and then communicate in ways that are mirroring their own language and their own relational ways of being. Whether they're leaning in a lot, we're going to lean in more. If they're a little bit reticent, we're going to be a little bit slower, a little bit more just careful to learn. If they're having struggle communicating, we may be using emojis, we may be playing games with littles. We are learning everything about those that we're supporting and then meeting them where they are. And when plural systems reach out to other lifelines, it's very typical that they're going to be through a series very quickly of questions that will ascertain whether or not they're suicidal. They will also be in that assessed for whether they are behaving correctly, is what I will call out. Uh, and are they acting right? Are they speaking in a way that demonstrates that they are in control or that they are out of control? And if they are perceived to be out of control in any way, and that is the responder's decision, it's not the person's own assessment of their own experiences. And then they are going to be escalated based again on whether the responder feels that the plural system that's reaching out is unsafe. We have many systems who have reached out. We've had our own experiences as well, but who reach out and say, because our littles were talking, we got in trouble. We were told that we can't call. We were told that we aren't safe. We can't talk to anybody if we don't have an adult that's talking. If we don't do X, Y, Z, then we are going to get in trouble. Or we told them that we were dissociating, or we told them that we have DID because we want them to understand. And then they escalated us to the police. There are so many horrible stories, but very often someone is swept up into a system of assessments. Those assessments will often deem them not fit in some way, not comported correctly, and then they will be swept away into that system more quickly than they can take care of themselves and understand what's happening. And so folks that have navigated that system a lot often become better and better at um, saying things in the right way, learning how to code things correctly, or the opposite happens and folks have so much trauma around it that they lose the ability to communicate and to find any sort of ability to articulate during a crisis. And so we will work a lot with younger parts who are just terrified and don't know where to go or what to do, but they've had our number and they know that we will talk to them in a safe way. And so I think that the primary difference is that we're going to build a relationship first, and we are never assessing their experiences. We are facilitating their own assessment of their experiences. So we want to know how they feel about their experiences. Are they afraid? Are they feeling comfortable, but they just need to talk? Or there's so many different reasons that folks might reach out, but what is their own assessment of their own experience, and what is support going to look like during this conversation? That conversation is often going to be an hour, hour and a half long. So it won't be something where we can build a long-term relationship, but in that space, how we want the same kind of relationship that we would build over time to happen in that short, condensed period, and know that it is valuable to them by the time that the conversation ends, that they had the support that they were looking for, not what we think support looks like.
Can't really put into words what I feel right now because it's so beautiful to hear about the work that you're doing. It's so different from what most people are met with in conventional systems. And I think back to my own days where, folks that I knew as we were in and out of hospitals and other people that were also in and out of hospitals, we used to talk about like, you have to play the game, right? Like, you can't be whoever it is that you are or however you are in a moment. You learn the quote unquote rules of that game and you act accordingly. Or just as you said, there are people who can't for various different reasons. It can be due to their disorganization of the system in the moment. It can be a lot of different things. And it's so honestly wonderful to hear about the work that you are all doing that's shifting that so that people don't have to, quote, play a game and can just come as they are. I've heard you in other places use the term dimensionalizing a person instead of focusing on the crisis itself. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about how that might be different, how you dimensionalize a system when that person is a system reaching out for care versus somebody who maybe doesn't recognize more distinct parts of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Humanizing is the crux of everything that I teach and everything that I've done, what I've learned in my own system, what I've learned within my own client care and so on. But over time, really understanding what I do when I humanize versus what the world kind of teaches as humanizing. What often is perceived as humanizing is, I smiled at you, I was kind to you, I did something nice for you so you can receive it. And if you don't, then that's on you. That's not humanizing. And so when I had to sit with, what do I really think? What am I really doing when I'm humanizing? And when language gets sticky because we all use words, but we don't necessarily know what they mean. We know how people use kind of what actions align with the words that they use. And it translates differently to different folks. So I have started calling dimensionalizing as a more active approach to the humanizing that I expect in the work that I'm training folks for. And what that means is that, again, thinking about multiplicity, thinking about multiple marginalization and so on, there are many, many layers to all of us. Even a singlet has many different parts of themselves that are navigated in conflicting ways and many layers of their life story. And that's just compounded when we are plural, right? And so every one of our humans internally also has layers to their own narratives and layers to their own truths. If we, again, put this in a carceral framework, then somebody who is reaching out in crisis is often going to be seen, like you said, as one dimension: the crisis, the suicidality, the harm, the hearing voices, whatever it is that doesn't look good will be the only dimension that is interacted with. And most of the time, the folks that are reaching out are not reaching out because suicide, or not reaching out because harm, or they're not reaching out because of one dimension. They're reaching out as a whole person with a lot of internal conflict, with all of those layers coming and having voices. And again, when we're plural, all of our internal humans are now at this kind of conflict. And so how can we truly recognize the multiplicity of whomever we're working with. And if we're working with someone plural, how many folks are we talking to? What are their different stories? What are their different perceptions of what's happening, of what they need, of, the different truths that are there? And within a crisis conversation that may be very short, we don't know. We're anonymous in those conversations. We're not working with folks over time, but people give us so much of themselves when they are, even if they are only communicating one sentence, in that one sentence, there are layers to that. So what are the dimensions? And this dimensionalizing is the very first thing that we require of our practitioners. So they have to understand how to communicate what are the dimensions that were just shared with you. And if you as a practitioner cannot recognize how you flatten somebody, we call it, when you single dimension somebody, you're flattening them into just one thing, and that's usually your bias. So how can you recognize when you are reacting to your own internal bias, your own internal fear around crisis or whatever fill in the blank is coming up, and that's the only thing you focus on? You filter everything out. Instead, let the filter be on the one dimension and seek to understand, really get inside those multiple dimensions with folks and sit inside their multiple truths, sit inside the nuance, sit inside the intention that they're facing, because that is why they want to be held inside that space. And if we can see each other as dimensional, then we can at least begin to hold space. And as a practitioner, it's really our job to see from other people's perspectives, not from our own. And so we cannot do that if we can't dimensionalize.
And it's so not what people are taught in crisis management at all.
Absolutely not.
I think about the concept of, quote, trauma-informed care, which I feel like that term has gotten so diluted to the absolute minimal at this point. It is so heartening to hear about the care that you are all putting into the work that you're doing with folks to make sure that they're able to retain their agency, their autonomy, and lean into their own wisdom in their own system and work with that instead of superimposing some belief that is probably, yes, born out of or rooted in bias that maybe came from academia, who knows, wherever the training program came from. But this is such a humanistic approach. And I think about how I really wish everybody who needed it could get it and be able to retain their autonomy and agency. It's so difficult when you're a trauma survivor and you are having any type of crisis and you need help and care. When you've been hurt so badly in the past, reaching out alone is such a huge trust fall. And then to know that you might be worse off as a result is terrifying. So hearing that they can reach out to you and know that they're going to be met with respectful, caring, compassionate, curious, accepting response is really an incredible gift to the entire community.
You just said it, but I just wanted to underscore again that every system has survived and they are beautiful. And we are systems because we survive, right? We know how to survive. And so the folks who are reaching out in crisis are the greatest experts. They've survived all the way to the point that they are communicating with you, and they will know far more because they've been inside their bodies, inside their lives, inside their systems for years and years. We've been communicating for a much shorter time. Whatever the practitioner relationship is, we have not been inside their system, inside their body, inside their life, inside their environment, right? And so really it just seems obvious to trust their own expertise and how they survive. The folks who are reaching out are the folks who are the experts. They know how to survive. And so it's not a question of, can I make you survive better? I don't know. It's not, that's an impossibility. And I think that not only creates a lot of fear and mistrust, but it also creates this idea for a practitioner to have to scramble and try to know better and be the authority. And the practitioner is not the authority on the lives of those that have been surviving for years and years through horrendous things that aren't even going to come up in most of those conversations because they're too many and too layered to come up. And those folks know how to survive. They just need someone that actually will sit and hold space and dimensionalize them.
When you were talking, it occurred to me that I think so many practitioners or first responders in crisis situations are also coming at it as I'm trying to make you look like me and how I navigate a crisis, even though our backgrounds are entirely different and I'm not a system, but you are. I need you to look like me. And when you're responding like I would, then I guess everything is okay, as opposed to what you're saying, which is dimensionalizing the person in front of you, really understanding all of the layers and nuances. And it's going to be different from you, and that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. And it should be. And when crisis support is only about compliance and then comportment, and now you've succeeded because you behaved in a certain way, so I can check that box. Those folks, everybody goes back into their lives, and their lives are in the same dimensions that they started when they can't comport themselves like practitioner A back in their lives and succeed in that. It's not their actual life. And so if they're constantly compelled to comply with this practitioner or this institution or this expectation, there's no actual skill for how can they be aligned within themselves and how can they face their actual lives as they really are. And so it's from an outside perspective, if we really zoom out, it's so ludicrous, but it's just been perpetuated so much that it continues to feel right to most folks because that's societally what we've been taught.
I'm also kind of sitting here thinking that people who are engaging in the not so great way of managing, quote unquote, the crisis only, I think many of those people are really afraid of levels of despair that the people in front of them are experiencing. And they're not necessarily trusting themselves to enter that space of despair or even trusting themselves to be able to feel a portion of that person's despair. When, I think so much healing can happen just by walking into that space together and being there and acknowledging the survival and the capacity and hope for the future.
Humans, as a rule, are not taught how to sit in their own scary things and to really be in their own despair. It's just positive it out and move it on. And for folks who live in a rather constant extreme of despair, often the despair is not scary. It's the new thing that broke the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, something new that hasn't been navigated before, or the last thing where I've dealt with it and I've dealt with it and I've dealt with it and now it's too much, whatever. There's different crux points, but the despair is not scary or is not the problem. It's just life. We're grieving all
Right.
of the time. There's not hope in a life that continues to tell me that there's not going to be hope. But if you can sit alongside me in that and treat it as if it is real and treat it as if my truth is true and treat it as if my experience of this is as normal as your experience of your own life, then we are human and you are human and we are the same. And that gets removed from everybody who despairs too much or gets removed from anybody who doesn't, look right, speak right, etc. And so very often we're just removing folks from their own capacity to speak their truth and be humanized inside of it, be treated as a whole human, just as you are a whole human. Just because someone's life has more layers of despair or more layers of trauma doesn't make their life any less valuable or any less livable. It's just different. And when we can sit inside that darkness together, we can sit inside the reality of the grief or the reality of the unknown. And that's when we're training practitioners, we are going to constantly invite them to sit inside their own stuff and to evaluate what is coming up for them and how do they sit inside their own uncertainties, inside their own fears, inside their own darkness. We all have it in different ways, right? And so what is despairing to you might not be what's despairing to me, but every one of us has something that will cause us despair. Whatever the thing is that we're frightened of and trying to change, we all have our own version of that. And so if we can be honest about that and sit inside our own truths, then we can also be more willing to hold space for others inside theirs.
Which in some ways is not accepted in society. I think back to the realization I had somewhere in the 90s when I was thinking, well, I was observing getting prescribed fistfuls of medication to make feelings go away. And that was happening to friends of mine too, whose feelings were just a normal response to a terrible situation. Like, you're not supposed to feel happy when something bad happens. And having somebody tell you, oh, here's some Prozac and some Seroquel and here's a bunch of stuff to put you also in a chemical restraint potentially, so that you're not creating an issue for somebody sitting next to you. And, oh, by the way, you're living in the past, so we need to get you in the present. All of those things are so incredibly invalidating, but also rejecting of the human experience.
If you constantly get that fed back to you, and then again, that propagates in your system, if we are plural, then what is the message on the other side of that? You shouldn't be here, right? You don't life right. You don't XYZ right. And your circumstances, the life that you have, the narrative that is, will always be your narrative. And so if we are always trying to undo that, then what are folks left with, and how are they moving forward without themselves? Here, erase everything that you've ever experienced and erase all of the reactions that you have that are most true to your experience and the way that you try to process and make sense of your own narrative. Erase all of that, and now you're good, move on. How are you supposed to survive with that approach?
And you can't survive in that approach, right? You certainly have no
Right.
hope of thriving in that approach.
No.
It's also, I can completely understand. I think this is part of what's happened to me historically, is you get those messages over and over and over again, and it creates a mandate of silence. And then your system takes on that mandate of silence. And when you
Yes.
do when you're lucky enough to find a practitioner or coach or a peer who's able to actually be with you in the reality of who you are in your life, you can no longer deliver that because you have been buried, really.
Yes. Yeah, you learn so much how not to communicate, that even trying to conjure up language or images or any kind of way that would communicate your experiences or help you be like, I take up more space. I was going to say be more real, but you're already real. It's just to take up more space, you can't, because it has been shut down and shut down and shut down and shut down. And that erasing your experience doesn't actually remove it. It just removes your access to it. And that also gives you none of all of your survival instincts are how you are a system, how you have navigated what you're understanding, and how the different perspectives of that are being held internally, and those kinds of things. So if we remove that communication internally, remove it externally, then it just continues to confound your system and your approaches to how you're going to make sense of things. And thereby, we only are able to survive and thrive because we can take what is, how we are experiencing it, feel through that, recognize how we perceive it, and then put it out into the ways that we move forward with the next piece of our lives.
Right. It's tragic when you think about that, people's authenticity essentially being kind of either, I guess, stolen from them or snuffed out, or I'm not sure what the right imagery is for that, but it feels really awful
Yeah,
to
it's
think about.
dehumanizing. It's unaliving people, and calling it keeping them alive. It is, literally removing their lives and their access to their lives from them, and then saying, okay, but now keep breathing because that's a mandate, but none of you should be here. That's an impossible reality that so many of the folks that we work with and ourselves have had to navigate. Okay, don't be here because everything about you is fundamentally wrong, but also you're required to be here, or else we're going to be very angry at you and we're going to force you to be here. And also, as soon as you're here, we're going to tell you not to be here. And how do you keep playing that back and forth and make any sense out of that?
It destroys lives, right? Which is honestly a great segue into Stronger You, the work that you're doing through Stronger You that's explicitly supporting people with plurality, be they survivors, practitioners, or the intersection of both. How how does Stronger You support folks in this way?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much the same. My Stronger You started 13-ish years before Thrive did, and all of the work that I do in Stronger You informed my practices within Thrive. The primary difference within Thrive is that we are Thrive is fully volunteer led. It's fully free services. We have undergraduate internship programs. We give a lot of resources to communities, that kind of thing. But all of that is free. Within Stronger You, we have our paid services, and those paid services fund the work that we do within Thrive. And so they are very much intertwined, but within Stronger You, we're able to navigate things like group coaching programs, one-on-one coaching, peer support through community Discord servers. We have both free servers and subscription-based one for folks that want a little bit more of that one-on-one, but not at a one-on-one coaching price. And then we have a variety of different educational opportunities, resources, and we give practitioner education. We have certification programs and courses and that kind of thing. So it's all rooted in the same thing. And in everything that we do, we really try to represent plurality, represent the multiplicity of our truths, not just our plurality, but all of the different intersections of our identities and experiences, and how that kind of comes together to form who we are. And then how do we walk alongside people? And within Stronger You, I guess another primary difference is that we are forming relationships with folks that are not anonymous. In Thrive, it's all anonymous, and they're not, even if somebody reaches out to the line repeatedly, they're not going to necessarily be working with the same person. They're not going to know who they're working with as a relational individual. There's not friendships or coaching relationships that are being formed. And within our peer spaces and coaching spaces and that kind of thing, then we're bringing together cohorts or the coaches working one-on-one to develop a very explicit ongoing relationship. So I think that it's really rooted in that anchoring within community and within care.
I've been consistently impressed by what I've seen you doing through Stronger You for the provider community, for folks who are systems. I'm also thinking about that moment in time when you're a system, maybe you're a provider too, and you want more, you want the opportunity for healing, you want that relationship, you're interested in maybe finding community in a group. And I also know sometimes that window of bravery is pretty narrow. So maybe there's a moment at, I don't know, 8:07 p.m. on a Tuesday evening or something where all of a sudden that window of bravery has opened up. And if I were wanting to make that connection with Stronger You, what would I do before my window closes? Like what would you recommend someone do just to get hooked up and connected with you all?
Yeah, the fastest ways to do that would be, we have a discovery call link on our website. We have a variety of downloadable resources that are all right there. And so folks can interact with those, and they're all developed directly from our work. So you can get a free glimpse at things that we would do in larger scale or more time. And then our Discord server is also available to join at link only, and you can go in and completely be an observer, not have to interact with others, but just learn how folks are showing up in community, what that looks like. And nobody's ever required to speak up or to be present if taking up space feels too scary. But all of those are very quick and things that are available 24/7.
This is a convoluted question, I realize, because we've talked a bit or a lot about the fact that people who are plural are often really engaged in high performing, high functioning survival. And there's a lot of internal labor that goes along with that when you're a system. Lots of different moving parts, lots of opposing emotions, lots of different memories that are compartmentalized, that are highly charged. There's so many different aspects to healing. How, or is there a specific pathway that Stronger You follows to help systems kind of move from that place of potentially white knuckling survival, or just being on that plane of I'm just surviving, I'm getting by every day, I probably could continue to get by, but I'm interested in doing more. I'm interested in knowing what thriving in life really feels like. Is there a specific pathway or sort of, I don't know what to call it, but avenue that you kind of walk down with folks to help them move from that survival place to one that feels more alive and thriving?
I think everything is relational, so it's going to be unique system to system and time to time, right? I mean, you already said the window. It's so common as humans. This is what feels safest right now is not necessarily what feels safest tomorrow or next year or whatever, because all of the different things that keep coming up. But in everything that we're doing, we're trying to take the labor off of folks in their day to day. So it shouldn't have to be so hard to interact. It shouldn't have to be so hard to function. It shouldn't have to be so hard to communicate, whatever, all of the things that you're sharing as you set up that question. It shouldn't have to be so hard. So how can we take the labor off? And we are doing that in practice, but also it's something that I've worked with for so long that I'm contemplating that in every avenue of accessibility before folks even come in. How can we give them as much information as possible? How can we make that communication as open and as safe feeling as possible? When we're still building a relationship, we don't always know what feels safe, but trending things help us, and then just asking specific questions and giving space to come back with things later because they change, right? And normalizing that. So really not requiring system to have to explain themselves, not having to keep giving greater and greater context, not having to prove their plurality, just not have to create the structure or create the safety of the system. That should be on me or on my practitioners. I think a fundamental principle of everything that I do is anchoring into community. I've had the unique experience of working with some of my primary clients for 18 years now. So as long as Stronger You has been alive, people have been with me all of that time. And that's a very rare privilege. And it's given me a unique insight into what it is to have anchoring, like truly anchoring into something that offers continuity, that offers community, that offers a way to ebb and flow, because all of us have flare-ups, all of us have life that so we get this linear idea of healing, right? It's always up, and then I cross some finish line and boop, I'm healed. And
The elusive
reality,
line that doesn't exist.
it doesn't, and we're socialized to expect it and to need it and to crave it, right? And in reality, I can be doing all the things all the right ways, even if I'm like really, really healing, and something's going to happen that I didn't expect, and it's going to cause that thing, or that flare up's going to come, or whatever is going to happen. And so being flexible and on the other side of that, and again, continuous, consistent in that, and having the space to be sustained over time, to be carried, to be held alongside, is, I think, has become a very fundamental part of my practice because of being able to do that for so long with clients. My clients have taught me, and that has informed the work that I do. And so just really being able to be alongside, and then always, I mean, every time that we meet, what does support look like today? And that question may be asked in different ways to different folks, right? Because it can also be like that deer in the headlights, don't make me
Yes.
answer everything. It's not my session to hold, but at the same time, it's my job to recognize what does that look like today. And it may be different today. And some people may say, I'm going to have different folks that are showing up. Can you just ask us what we need each time? Absolutely. Don't ask me, because that makes everything go inside. We don't know, whatever. But how
So real,
can
though.
we build that relationship in a way that really, each time we come together, what does thriving look like? What does safety look like? What does support look like? And how can we facilitate that in the time that we're together? And how can we think about that in the time that we're apart too? And I think, what happens often in practitioner spaces is folks have to go through all of the worst parts of their lives within this session, and then recover after that session. And that recovery happens, and then there's this kind of desperation and waiting for the next session to happen, and then the whoop of all the trauma again, and then the recovery, and so how can we take that away and really truly, like, we're still here, we're still meeting, we're still doing the same thing. Why do we don't have to be so focused on building up into a climax of trauma, and then the
Right?
cave on the other side of that? Why can't we just be alongside our lives as they are? And these, yes, there are trauma aspects, and there are also all the other parts of your life and parts of yourselves. And so how can we know those, and again, come alongside them in ways that are really meaningful, not that are causing more recovery on the other side?
I really love how you framed the flare-ups that we all have, which is so very true. You mentor a lot of providers who are survivors in plural themselves. And being one myself, not one that you mentor, but being a provider who's plural, there's I feel like a lot of pressure that happens in that space, right? Because the mental health community either explicitly or implicitly mandates that you basically have all your shit together all the time. There's the ethical codes around what you're able to share and not able to share. So healing publicly is not typically an option for many people if they want to continue practicing. And arguably, we don't need our clients worried about our own mental health and that sort of thing. And many times, especially if you're plural, I think you have parts that can manage your work life quite well. And whatever is happening in your personal life isn't relevant necessarily to the work that you're doing with individual clients. So they don't need to be saddled with worrying about you. All of that said, given that sort of unique situation of sorts, what kinds of needs are you seeing in providers who are plural that typically is overlooked in all sorts of clinical supervision or coaching type spaces?
Think there are many, but some of the things that come to mind for me are the ability to be flexible and that not to be seen as a dysfunctional or as a problem, as a lack of function. There are so many ways that we can navigate getting work done and also being flexible to our dynamic needs. And that may not fit a traditional 9 to 5 box or a 40-hour box or whatever, but we may be able to do extremely amazing things at all different hours or different, concentrated times or whatever that looks like. Every system is different, but really understanding what, if they were thriving, what kind of flexibility would they need and how can they give that to themselves and then communicate that in their workspaces if they're not working for themselves. And if they're working for themselves, then it's how we communicate to our clients and those kinds of things, right? We're still having to communicate it internally and recognize our own needs before we can then set up our lives in that way. And having folks be received in a flexible way is, I think, really important. Having folks understand their own multifaceted natures and being okay with that. I think that our own system awareness, even if we are really dedicated to our own care and our own getting to know ourselves, it's still scary if we fear what will happen because a little shows up or because we can't work today because nobody is here that wants to work or whatever it is. If we're afraid of ourselves, then we can't embrace our multifaceted natures, right? And we are many. And so how can we work together in unity? And if we can't be comfortable within ourselves and all the different ways that we show up, then we can't come to that space where it's, and not, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier to align within our own, in our system, there's folks that need to be really creative, folks that need heavy structure, folks that need routine, folks that don't need routine, folks that need play, folks that need rigor. There's all of that. So how can we set up our day to day in a way that helps all of us to work together in a more unified way that helps life to flow and work to flow and all of those kinds of things. So I think in part, it's just our own comfort with ourselves and knowing ourselves, but how can we help folks to come into that space where they are comfortable enough to be more curious and comfortable enough to say, okay, this is how that can apply into work, life, whatever things that we're trying to align with. We have to be aligned as a system or things are not going to align out external to that. I think you kind of mentioned this, but the idea that DID or plurality is automatically a liability, especially within the mental health field. And so that's going to force a lot of masking. And so how can folks decrease the need to mask, even if they're not speaking to their plurality? There are so many creative ways that we can speak to our truths and not, and fly under the radar, because like you said, you have to play the game. But how can we remove that labor again, that fear of always being a liability? And how can we recognize we are assets? We are not a liability. We are assets. We can do things that nobody else can do. We can meet the multiple perspectives of and the multiple nuanced truths and the multiple tensions that folks carry within themselves, whether they're plural or whether they're singlets. They have all competing needs and competing layers of their own humanity that have to be understood and they can't sit with because they can't navigate those multiple perspectives. We're really good at that. So how do we see ourselves as an asset instead of a liability, and then not have so much system breakdown and fear because we have greater trust and greater confidence within ourselves? And then I think aligning our work and our lives and our needs, is I think that this is important in everybody's lives, but something that we talk about in our communities as plural folks a lot. Like, how do we make sure that we have the different times that we need, whether that's in a given day, in a given week, month to month, whatever. How do we make sure that our different needs are met, whether it's creativity, inspiration, connection, just dissociating and getting away from it. How can we be fluid enough throughout our day and align with ourselves internally so that, again, we can align ourselves externally with our lives? And that may not look traditional, and that's really hard for a lot of folks. And some folks will really strive for that. I want 9 to 5, married with 2.5 kids, having everything be whatever society has taught us it needs to be. And that is my goal. And that's completely okay if that aligns with your system's needs and you're comfortable with that. But how can we honor ourselves in all of the different ways that we show up in a way that we can nurture our life? And if that's grieving what we wish it had been in a traditional expectation or in a societal expectation, and embracing what is and what really helps us to thrive, or it's understanding, I love this, societal expectation is what we need, but we also need a couple of these accommodations, a couple of these caveats here. So how do we navigate that? No matter what we're needing, we all need to be able to sit with that. And I think it's just a little bit more nuanced as folks are all.
I still want to meet the 0.5 kid.
I
What does that
know.
look like? People ask me this all the time, and I don't necessarily have one or two answers either, but it is really complicated when you're trying to figure out how to meet the needs of your system and do your job. Now, that's not to say we don't do our jobs well, right? Because we've got lots of parts that can figure that out. But when you stop to think about it, you can be a system at work taking care of people and have a lot of stuff happening in the background in your own system. There can be parts that are upset that you can hear, potentially crying or screaming or arguing or having some really interesting commentary on everything that you're doing, and other parts that are really needing time to play, to let loose, to just decompress. And you're still focused and you can hold it together to do that, arguably, right? And if you are a mental health provider, your job probably isn't 9 to 5. Even out of your face-to-face hours, you're going to have clients, especially if you work with plural clients, you're going to have people contacting you between and out of sessions via either text or email or whatever. There's a lot to manage. So that said, are there tools that you find yourself using or recommending to folks who are systems as they're trying to just kind of map out a little bit who can have time when, how I can take care of the parts of me that need care, how I can be focused at work and not lose myself doom scrolling on TikTok in between or whatever it might be? And it's, I haven't found the perfect tool by any means, but I'm curious about some of the ones that you might use.
I think, again, more personally, I will design things with folks or align with like, if there's so many apps out there or different system mapping tools that already exist. And so we'll connect folks to those existing resources and talk through ways that they're working. And I just like to um, learn what is working and what curiosities folks have about, because some things are too much for folks and it feels like a lot of homework. How can we alleviate that sense of added labor, right? And then get curious about, okay, what if some of it's just conversation, and I will be the one that tracks that for folks. Okay, you've talked about this, and I can hold that. It depends, again, system to system. I don't think there's any one tool that is the one, as much as it's really what helps folks to get curious in a way that inspires them and helps them to feel closer and more connected to each other, to their life, or whatever it is that they're navigating, and what feels like added labor, because that's going to fail. And so if it's like, oh, I got to track all of these things, and if I don't do it, then everything's going to fall apart, then that kind of pressure is just going to continue to add to that chaos. And so I think there are folks that go from tool to tool to tool to tool to tool to tool, and we've all done it.
So real.
One thing that's going to save us, and it is so human, but is it the tool? And if it is, like, we can find a system that works. If it's just like, what is it that isn't working? Can we figure that out? And then we can design something, or we can kind of quilt together a couple of different apps, tools, whatever. Or is it that we're trying to find this thing that's not aligned with us? So my perfect healing life or whatever. And if I just got these things together, but that's so extrinsic. And so what intrinsically are we needing that helps us to take time to hear what we're needing internally, take time to get the feedback externally when that isn't aligning with whatever's happening inside, and then be able to do. And I think the other thing is that people take on, so we come in, what, it's November, come in mid-November, and we say, okay, for the rest of the year, I'm going to do this. And like, we align every aspect of our lives moment to moment within that. That's what I see all the times, because now is the time, got it all together. November 15th, I'm going to start, and all of my entire day and all of my entire rest of the year is done. It's taken care of. And nobody can live that life because that's not the life they were living yesterday. And so how can we find the little pieces of that, and be embracing the small chunks instead of the largest changes, because this is so wellness woo woo, but you know, we have to have achievable goals. And I think that I hate saying things like this because I'm like, I'm not, but the reality is, how do we bite off little pieces, little pieces, little pieces? And how does that resonate with us internally rather than that external pressure to have to, plural folks more than anyone are constantly under that pressure to have to look a certain way, have to have their lives conform in a certain way. And so if we do that to ourselves, we're just going to keep traumatizing ourselves, or keep fighting ourselves, because it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. And so what is, right now, it might just be that so-and-so inside needs a hug, and that's okay. We did that today. The rest is just what it is. Let's get up every day and see if they need a hug, or let's take that time to, really hardcore focus because we love to write, or we love to, see progress on something. Did you get some time for that today? Okay, that's enough. And being in the grace of that, I think, is where I usually try to start with folks, because there's already so much pressure to have to perform.
I love this though, because I think so many folks you just want to be able to kind of live your life somewhat spontaneously, and arguably there's a little extra work you have to do as a system. But I think as a result of sometimes being around people who aren't systems, who have found the perfect way of going about their lives, there can be this idealization of there's got to be some tool that I can use to track to plan to. And if you would talk to anybody who was talking to me about a year ago when I discovered using Notion, which I thought was the solution to all of my woes, it lasted for exactly 6 days. And then it was way too much work. And it depends
This
on who's
is
fronting too, right? Like, it was great for a
exactly.
part
Do
that
they even know how to use it?
the answer to
That
that
it's
is no.
scary. It's just so hard. And there's, I mean, this is, it's so human, but like, folks that are doing the things are doing them because it's one little piece that they did today. This person is crying so much inside, and I took time to listen. I took time to hold them. I took time to, and it's the little pieces of that puzzle. It's not that they woke up on November 15th and put all of the things in order, and then boom, they had it, and now they look like they're so put together that everybody wants that. And that it's so human, and it's so bad that that continues to propagate. But we do these things because we take that little bit of time to do the thing that helps us inside to feel held, to feel cared for, to feel okay, to feel inspired, to feel happy, whatever it is. This one just wants to play, and we actually gave them time to play. This one just needs to, like, actually put a project together, and they got to do that. And little bit by little bit, that feels holistic. It feels whole internally, and that's going to help us to feel like we can both be okay because we're aligning with ourselves, and also have something to look forward to, or to know that we will be confident in, because the next time that something happens, we know how to listen, we know how to show up for each other.
So that means everyone listening, you can abandon your color coded Google Calendar. You don't have to keep it up. But I think what you're speaking to is actually something you spoke a little bit about earlier, which is flexibility. We need to have flexibility within ourselves as systems. And how we show up for ourselves is probably going to look a little different from day to day, depending on who's fronting, depending on who needs what inside. But the thing that I hear a lot in your words is the importance of getting to know your system.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's already like if we put this at like a chronic illness state, then someone who has flare-ups every 3 or 4 weeks, their routine is going to look different naturally in 3 weeks out of the month than in the fourth week or whatever, while they have to navigate that flare, and then things are going to settle down for a little bit and then they're going to rise back up again. And so already, most people's lives can't have that kind of absoluteness to them. And we have many folks going through many different chronic experiences internally, many different chronic memory, chronic trauma, chronic, sometimes even different chronic illnesses physically. And so all of those things are going to ebb and flow internally, and those are going to affect how our mind rests, how we sleep, how our body feels, all of those kinds of things. And so, yeah, it is that much more flexible and that much more knowing ourselves. So I think that there's kind of an added labor that we have that others may not have, but it's also, I like to look at it as the beauty of relationship. We got to have so many more connections and so many more understandings. And so it's a beautiful thing to get to know each other.
It's so true. I think there's so much about it that is life enriching, and you brought that up earlier on, just talking about the ability to have multiple perspectives, multiple points of view based on, the multiple parts of self, or
Yeah,
whichever phraseology we want to use for that. For systems who might be currently listening and feeling like they're in that space of internal kind of chaos, or maybe it's denial, or maybe it's overwhelm, or a combination of all of the above, is there a message that you would most want them to take away today?
just being able to hold space for each other. I think in the internal chaos, it's the more that we can realign with ourselves, oftentimes that, and everybody's experiences are different, so I don't want to speak universally, but within chaos, there's a sign. Somebody's not heard, and often many are not heard, and there's some sort of tension. And that may be something that's out of alignment internally. It may be an environment that's unsafe, and everybody inside is like, and we're just like, but it's supposed to be safer. I'm supposed to be here, whatever. And so that internal chaos is showing us that there's something that needs to be attuned to, and that we need some alignment around. And so how can we take that pause and be curious and understand and listen? And I think that is a practice, that it's not just listen and then everything will be okay and there won't be internal chaos. It's a lot of practice of, okay, who is talking, what is happening, what is the sense of chaos in my own system. When that kind of chaos is happening, then there's a sign that there is something that's not safe environmentally, something that relationally and with external relationships is out of alignment in ways that may have happened in small subsets of change. And so it didn't seem as noticeable, but internally it's like, hello. Or it's, things have shifted internally where folks are not getting heard, and younger parts maybe like really desperate, and that kind of like crying out to be held and to be seen and nurtured and that kind of thing. And so by being able to be curious and sit with that internal chaos in our own system, it's helped to say, okay, what that is more of a sign. It's not a thing to fear. It's not a thing to despair about, or to think now everything is crisis and it won't be better. It's a thing to sit with and to hold space for. And whether that's, holding space internally first and learning what is coming up, what's underlying that, who's not being heard, and then being able to grapple with what is not aligned. There may be conflicting needs, conflicting truths. Again, what's happening externally, is there some feeling good and some aren't feeling good about that, what's happening. And so I think within, the next piece of that is just really grappling with, and now what? Something probably is going to have to change. And again, speaking in our own experience, everything is different for different folks, but we learn that internal chaos means that we're going to be at crisis level. Everything's really bad. And we've already talked about the punishment to that crisis experience. And so if that chaos equals bad equals punitive, then we can't comfortably sit with it. And so I think developing that practice, and it may again be aligning with another human externally that can sit with that chaos and hold it and be okay, because that can help us to mirror that back internally when it doesn't feel safe to do so for ourselves. I think that denial is maybe a little bit different. It can also come with chaos internally, but we all experience, I think this is a fairly universal experience of denial, because already like systemically we are denied, in society we are denied. And so it is only natural to then mirror back denial internally and to question, there's no way this could be true, or this isn't right. And if we're having multiple conversations internally about our denial, then we're giving ourselves our answer. But we all need that, and we all go through that time in some kind of way. And it's okay to deny. Maybe denying is protective right now, right? And maybe it's giving us space because we can only process so much trauma at one time. We can only process so much nuanced self in at each interval of our lives, and denial has its own really powerful protective mechanism, and that's okay. So sometimes being okay and being gracious with that is where we need to be. And other times it's okay to say, okay, how can I get curious about that? What's happening? What is it telling me? And why do I need that right now? Is it coming from internal, or is it coming from external? Is it because I keep getting denied, and so then that gets played back out internally? So there's so many ways, but I think that in messaging back, would just say, if you're in denial, it is okay. It's okay to sit with it. It's okay to not know if you're plural, if you have DID, if all of the different, it's Stronger You, we're not gatekeeping Thrive. We're not gatekeeping, like, check, you passed the test. Now you are dissociative enough, so we will support you.
You're real.
It's okay that folks can show up however they need to, and whatever language they use at whatever time, and how they evolve. We expect everybody to evolve over time, and whether they weren't and now they recognize that they are, or they were and they recognize that they aren't, or all of the different ways that shows up in all sides of the equation, because we're just messy as people anyway. And that gets really more nuanced whenever there's a society that plays a lot of negative messaging back to us. And so it's natural and it's okay. And however folks show up is okay.
I love everything about what you just said. My last question for you is for providers who are listening, who are really wanting to do well by their clients, and many of them are worried about doing harm and are often feeling like they don't have enough information. So they're looking for every certification, every course, every workshop, every training, what words of wisdom do you have for them?
I mean, come and work with us if you want someone to work alongside you and help you grow your own practice. And that's not like not just a plug. Find others. If it doesn't have to be Stronger You, but find folks that are invested in how you show up and how you grapple with your own harm. We all cause harm, and we can't really be a good practitioner, in my opinion, if we don't grapple with how we cause harm, and how what is most helpful to one person is harmful to another, and what's most harmful to one person is helpful to another. And that could even happen within a system. So we have to come to a place where we don't fear harm in the sense of ourselves. If I mess this up, everything breaks. No, if I mess this up, I need to know how to repair. I need to know how to come back into alignment, how to reattune with whomever I'm supporting, how to get back inside their perspectives and to understand where they are, to make amends. That repair work is so much more important. All of us as humans are going to harm we don't know. And even in ourselves, I'm speaking for just my system, we are going to harm each other in ways that, like, oh, I didn't know this was what I thought we needed. This is not, we're all in this cycle of learning and not knowing and trying again and trying again. And it's not that harm should happen. We don't want to harm. Nobody wants to harm. But societally, especially I think in Western societies, we are taught so much that we are right and we have to be right and we have to know how to do it right, that the biggest fear is, I'm going to get this wrong. So when we're working with practitioners, we are inviting them to get it wrong and to get comfortable with that, and to then notice the signs as quickly as possible. And that, not just rupture, but from the smallest disconnect, how can you see those signs? How can you know, within that, how to build a reconnection point with somebody? And if there is a bigger repair needed, how to make amends and how to come back into alignment. So we're really teaching attunement with folks. And that is an ongoing practice. There's not a certification that's going to teach you all of the different ways that folks show up and all the different ways that you can harm them and all of the different ways that you won't know things, and that like we all go back into our own biases. We flip out of other people's perspectives. We flip out of attunement. We lose that. It's hard to maintain that. And so we teach an ongoing practice, an ongoing, how evaluation, how do we interrogate our own work? How do we see where we're coming from? What did connect? What didn't connect? And every connection point that we have and every disconnection that we have with a client will inform the practice that we have tomorrow. And if we aren't able to embrace that, then we will continue to struggle as practitioners and to kind of be afraid of ourselves. And that's going to make it really hard to show up for our clients. And so no matter where you're going, find others that can walk alongside you and have these more nuanced and really honest conversations, and then help you to grapple with, because we become better when we are asking ourselves the hard truths and facing ourselves as we are. And then again, sitting in our own darkness helps us to sit in the darkness with others.
There's so much wisdom that folks can unpack there. So if you are a provider, I hope that you actually scrub back just a little bit and listen to that again. There's so much there. Can't thank you enough for coming on today and having this conversation. There's so much here that's going to help so many people. And I'm really hoping too that folks who maybe don't typically listen, who work with folks in crisis situations, tune into this episode to really be able to learn from you, because you just bring so much healing. Not just the how-tos, but you embody it yourself. You're informed by so much of your own life experience and professional experience. And I know people who've used your services who have benefited tremendously, people who are really close to me. And I am really grateful to all that you do.
Thank you, Monica. It's just an honor to be in community and to give back to folks. And again, if we can come alongside and help one more person not suffer in the ways that we have, then we hope that continues to propagate out into our communities, more and more.
That's what it's really all about, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. There's so much wisdom packed in here. The importance of being able to lean into your own wisdom, being relational, having humanity, remembering the dimensionality of every human being in their care, being curious about yourselves, whether you are a system or a provider. Just so much here. I know even though we were lucky enough to be the ones having this conversation, we are definitely going back and listening to it more than once. We will be sure to link to Stronger You Wellness and Thrive Lifeline and Ryder's work in the show notes. So be sure to check out some extra resources there and take really beautiful care of yourselves. And until next time, let's keep healing. Thank you for tuning in. You can find our blog on Substack at healingmyparts.substack.com and on Instagram at healingmyparts. Just a disclaimer, any information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for professional therapy or behavioral health care, nor does listening to the podcast constitute a therapist-client relationship. Please be sure to take extra good care of you. And until next time, keep healing and thriving.